Thank you everyone for your patience. So now we have Lubomila Jordanova. Yes. And you are the founder and CEO of Planet A Earth, a Berlin-based startup enabling companies to measure, monitor, and reduce their environmental footprint and improve their ESG performance. So prior Plan A, you worked in investment banking, venture capital, and fintech in Asia and Europe. So please welcome Lubomila.
So good, oh good, don't worry, I'll cover that.
Welcome her.
No worries. A few years ago, I found myself on a beach like this, or supposedly I was going to. I planned a trip with some friends of mine to Morocco, where I was going to be learning how to surf. That didn't happen, and this beach didn't look like this. Especially, my expectation was that I would be going to a place that is incredibly clean and organized. The reality was a bit different. On the first day of the trip, I ended up on a beach called Banana Beach, which supposedly is one of the most famous, most special because of the size of the waves. And the reality was this: a lot of little pieces of evidence of human existence. I wasn't able to get in the water because the waves were too big and my level of competence was not there yet. So I was just sitting and decided that might as well just do something with my time. I collected a bit of the trash. Within 1 hour, I was able to collect 6 pairs of shoes, a lot of burnt plastic, also quite a lot of construction material, and quite a few pieces of clothing, anything that you can think of that a human can leave. What ended up happening after that was that I returned back to London, where I was living and working at that point, and had a newly acquired consciousness about the fact that actually our cities and our environment was not necessarily well taken care of. I didn't know anything about climate change at that point. I didn't know anything about pollution, about human impact on nature, and decided that I needed to question this a bit more and make myself a bit better informed, because clearly there was a problem. This beach that was economically supporting the local community was not at all taken care of, and these people were actually living off tourism. And as my investigation kicked off, it turned out that they were not the only ones that were living in this reality where they would ignore the impacts that they would be making. I did what we all do when we get excited about a topic. I bought a lot of books, I watched TED videos, I watched documentaries, read academic papers, subscribed to some magazines, and listened to podcasts, just to grasp actually what was this whole thing called climate change, what was pollution doing to climate change, and how is it actually connecting the dots between us, the planet, the whole ecosystem. The findings were quite shocking, and they led me to decide to do some experiments related to data. The first thing that I built was a data model that was looking on one hand at the worst performing environmental indicators, and then on the other hand, the funding that was going into these problems or addressing these problems. No positive correlation whatsoever. Money were going to the Western world, were going to wonderful countries like Denmark and other Scandinavian nations, which supposedly were having a lot of environmental issues. The second experiment that I did was to ask my friends, who at that time were a homogeneous group of management consultants and investment bankers, about their opinion on climate change and kind of what they felt was their responsibility in the whole story. Also, the results were not necessarily incredibly inspiring. I ended up finding out that people felt like the responsibility was always on another stakeholder. So if you were the professional working in a bank, then the government had to do something. If you were working in the government, then someone else had to do something, maybe the citizens. But it was kind of this constant football game that everyone was passing the ball to each other without thinking actually of the collaborative element of the whole problem. After all of this experimentation, my educational process, also like getting my hands dirty and building this model and also asking people questions, I came out with 3 particular conclusions. And mind you, this was 2017, so the topic of climate change was not yet worldly defined or concerning many countries. There was no Fridays for Future at that point. There was no Extinction Rebellion. These kind of movements that have been now probably pushing a lot more the way we define the problem. The three key outcomes were related to the fact that, first of all, businesses had to be at the core of addressing climate change. All of this exploration, all of the research that I did was showing that the emissions that we're looking into eliminating or reducing were actually at 70% created by businesses. Surely they were, of course, enabled by governments, they were enabled by also different types of stakeholders to be able to do their business, but they had a direct impact on our planet that was not necessarily the most positive. The second thing was related to climate change science. From all of the research that I did, it was incredibly sad to see how much solutions were hidden in all of the scientific papers and how they were just literally sitting in labs and were sitting in these thousands of pages of research and were not applied in any way at scale or within the real economy. And then the final learning, which was kind of probably the high-level understanding of the bigger problem of how we were not necessarily positioning ourselves well in this ecosystem that we claimed we were managing, but we were actually, just participants in, was that we needed a collaborative approach. It was not only about businesses being empowered to do something about addressing climate change, it was about them being also enabled to the different stakeholders, be it how they work with NGOs, be it listening to scientists, be it involving themselves into actually understanding what they had to do with that. Long story short, what we ended up doing for the last 5 years is we developed 2 products, and they're sticking now within this software, which is a software as a service platform that enables corporates and fast-scaling companies to reduce their emissions and also improve their ESG performance. We do complex data processing to enable really deep understanding of emissions, but also of kind of how you can improve. What are the emission hotspots, how you can actually get to the point of really reducing effectively these emissions at scale. At this point, we've been able to achieve around 8% on a yearly level reduction for all of our clients, and we've been able to process the CO2 emissions of the equivalent of half of Germany, which is okay. In terms of the kind of scale of the challenge, nowhere close to getting what we should be doing, but still a lot of progress for the few years that we've been existing. These are some of the clients that we work with, and I find this slide important just to the extent that it can demonstrate the depth of capacity we have in terms of industry coverage, because we do fashion, construction, financial institutions, and for all of those we have different types of analysis capabilities. But today I'm here to tell you a bit more about actually what is the responsibility of the tech industry in addressing climate change. I think one of the key learnings for these many years now that I've been dealing with this topic, it kind of feels like, we feel as Plan A that we've been kind of the dinosaurs of the space, because 5 years ago there was barely anyone working on climate data science, combining this with machine learning, combining this with like really interesting capabilities that technology can enable you to do. And throughout this journey, there's been a few particular elements that I have been able to engage myself with that have allowed me to understand that there's a role and there's also a responsibility of our industry that maybe we're claiming, maybe we're not. So first, maybe just defining some terms. What is role versus responsibility? Role is something that is given to you. It's something that maybe is kind of a label. You're the CEO, the CTO, the chief data officer, or a product manager, whatever you are. And you essentially get within this label some sort of a definition of what supposedly is your responsibility. Responsibility is what's written on your job description. It's what's written maybe in the memo that your supervisor or you've defined for yourself if you're building your own company. But it's also these unassumed things that you also can claim. This is essentially the topics that maybe on a value level move you. Maybe the topics that you feel deeply connected to, and you just take an initiative in your company and you decide to do yourself. So if we start first with the role, I think one of the most obvious ones that you can look into from the perspective of the tech industry is kind of optimization of processes. Up until now, we've been optimizing processes for efficiency, for money savings, time saving. We've never applied ourselves actually to optimize for the environmental impact. How do we actually do something that is less harmful to the planet? And what this year demonstrates is actually something that we're doing. This is kind of what our product does on the external data and internal data, how we connect this, and then how this leads essentially to the benefit gains, so like the efficiency gains that a company can have by embedding this environmental KPI layer to the way they decide what they can do. But the examples for the tech industry go a lot beyond that. You can think of energy efficiency, you can think of waste elimination, you can also think of just optimization of usage of certain materials in the cycles that we have when it comes to manufacturing. Which leads me to my second example of the role of the tech industry that we have always been kind of having, but without thinking necessarily about the environmental side of the story. And this is about resource management. If you look at like a typical cycle of how we define a manufacturing of a particular product, we're looking into the material sourcing, then the manufacturing itself, and then you're looking into kind of distributions in terms of logistics, sales, consumption. This cycle is actually broken. At this point of time, we don't apply the mindset of a circular economy in the way we actually use our resources, which leaves a lot of opportunities for money to be wasted and also for time to be lost, and also for stakeholders to be kept out of the loop in the whole process. We actually have been, and that's something I can dive into the Q&A about, we built a community called the Greentech Alliance, which has more than 1,300 companies addressing different challenges related to climate change that come from the tech industry. And some of the examples of the companies that we have there actually are solely focusing on taking a traditional business model of a company and through the use of a software, adding the circular economy mindset to it. The examples are plenty, and you can dive into each one of those points that you see here and think of where the environmental side is. We don't do that, and we need to be doing this a lot more often. Another element that is also part of the role of tech is related to engagement. All of us are using our time and effort into building whatever product it is to get customers to do stuff. You get them to buy things. You get them to also maybe have awareness of a new feature you've developed. But anything that we have as an output as tech companies has some sort of a call to action. A call to action normally would be, of course, again, optimized for where you increase revenue. But what's been happening lately, and I'm sure you've seen plenty of examples, is related to engaging clients with the topic of sustainability as embedded within the user experience. On the left-hand side, there's Zalando, which I'm sure many of you know, the big e-commerce company. They now have actually a filtering, and there's plenty examples, and that's not a specific one, like anyone that is offering fashion these days from the bigger companies has this, allowing users essentially to be able to reduce emissions by purchasing a more sustainable product. The second example that is here is a company that solely focuses on secondhand sales, and they kind of not only have embedded this engagement with sustainability into the user experience, but just as the general value proposition. These examples are in no way my explanation of whether I think these companies are sustainable or not. It's just examples of how actually, now tech companies are thinking about their role in engaging their clients with the topic of sustainability. Another one that often gets to be confused as responsibility rather as a role of the tech community is related to equality. This here is an example of the United Nations University, it's a quote from them, which essentially speaks about the skill premium. We all know that our industry, and especially when it comes to like the data side of things, is quite of a fancy part of today's tech realm, tech ecosystem, and there's a lot of interest in the talent. This event itself is a demonstration of that. But what this leaves actually our community with is a lot of missed opportunities for being able to tap into all of the talent that is out there. And the idea of the skill premium is essentially that, you know, those people that have certain skills, they have been able to upskill themselves to a certain level for what is much in demand, essentially eating out the opportunity for others to be part of the community. So in this particular case, it's about like, how do you train your team, or how do you get people that don't have this particular background to be able to participate in this economy, and being able to kind of build products that are more not necessarily sustainable. I would of course argue for that, but that are essentially from within the tech realm. I've been asked multiple times, why am I speaking about equality when I should be speaking about climate change? For those of you that maybe are yet in the beginning of the whole journey of climate change is a story of inequality. It's about the story of inequality between the global south and the global north. It's also about the story of inequality between men and women. Women are taking actually the biggest burden when it comes to climate change. So that's why this is also here, and why we also need to be thinking about this element as well. And then a second, number one, this is not a mistake, it's actually a purposefully chosen kind of labeling. It's because actually responsibility is equally as important as role. Role is something that no one is going to question that you have as a job to do. Responsibility, from my perspective, today is actually a lot more important than probably it has ever been. Because people choose their jobs, people choose their also engagements, how they spend their time based on their values a lot more than ever. They care about the companies that are doing something about maybe sustainability, maybe about equality, maybe about empowerment of certain communities. And with this, regardless on which side of the story you sit, whether you're the one that is seeking a job or you're building a company that is actually engaging these new people to join, you need to be thinking about this probably more often than actually the role side of the story, because the role side is kind of embedded. So the first thing that probably is kind of, it always acts as a shocker for many, but it should not be, especially in a city like London, is about the amount of money in the ecosystem. It's never been as easy to raise money in the tech industry than, like, honestly, ever. I've been in the tech industry now for close to, I don't know, how many? I don't know. 10 years maybe. And essentially the whole story like kind of was that there was like the time in the beginning of the 2010 something that was like a bit avant-garde to be in the tech industry. It's like the Amazons and the Googles. There was a few cool companies doing like fintech stuff and so on. Now everyone is having either a CVC that is putting a lot of money into startups, or is having a startup on the side of their job or whatever it is. And there's a lot of money in the industry. That also calls for responsibility, because if you are given access to this capital, you need to know how to use it in a way that it actually acts on behalf of people, planet, profit. You can't be just seeking the VC return. And I'm saying this with the full responsibility that last week we announced our Series A from like mainstream VCs. Like there's no there's no kind of solely altruistic approach to that. You know, in the tech industry, especially if you look at the VC model, there's very clear expectations for returns and so on. But you also, as someone that works in a startup or owns a startup or owns a tech company or whatever it is, you have the possibility to decide how these money are spent. And when it comes to the topic of climate change, we're sitting actually on a huge problem that takes a lot of money to address. It takes time, and we don't have any of it. So essentially, if we have any capacity to be addressing climate change, it is going to come from those that have the financial capability to support any project, to support any initiative, team members that are actually kicking off the ideas internally. And if, cynically enough, maybe you think like, okay, I want to be building my product, I want to just be making like, a lot of profits and get to the level where my company is like the best well-known in the industry, sure, keep on doing that. But the element of responsibility that from today's perspective is actually expected from many of the tech companies, especially the leading companies, is defining yourself as a thought leader in a particular topic. And sadly, or good for those that of you are interested, there is space for you to claim this leadership in the industry. We work with so many large corporates that become defining for the whole industry, because they're the first one to actually disclose their scope 1, 2, and 3. They're the first ones to actually explain that they're reducing within 5 years 30% of their emissions. emissions, rather than actually maybe putting something for 2050, hoping no one is going to remember. The second element of responsibility is related to transparency, and this is something that this is a statistic that is widely known, but sometimes gets to be forgotten. It is about how emissions are distributed across different topics and different industries. So, you know, we have agriculture that, according to different statistics, is at like 18 to 25% of emissions. This is like growing things and so on. Electricity is kind of the main, most concerning elements, like consumption of electricity, and you basically have the making things and plugging in as where energy consumption goes in, and then you have temperature and transport. I was reading last week that actually there's a lot of expectation now that by 2025 the tech industry is going to start being responsible for close to 15% of emissions on this planet, which is insane. If you think that many of us are just not building even something physical, but just because of the sheer amount of data that is stored and also kept and analyzed, like we just have also like statistically responsibility on that side of the story. And I think when you look at that, it kind of sometimes can become a bit overwhelming, thinking, okay, what am I supposed to be doing with this? Like, this is too much, you know, too much emissions, too many emissions, too much CO2 to take into consideration. I'm still in the beginning of my company, or I'm doing something in like a large corporate. There's no space for me to actually start taking responsibility on that. Actually, it starts with a very simple step of taking just the small experiment of calculating your emissions. Not necessarily with our software. There's plenty of tools out there that can give you some, you know, more averaged out analysis. But it's a good indication of actually where you could be headed and what you can take as a responsibility of kicking off some initiatives for reduction as well. And then this is a favorite slide of mine because it quite often has been claimed for not being known by people. I'm sure many of you received the tote bag that was given to us here. So good news, this tote bag is actually probably a more sustainable option. Bad news, if you use it only one time, it's worse than a plastic bag. It's worse than a paper bag and any other. You need to use 171 times a bag in order for it to, like this one, and that is kind of looking into the emissions that are created by how does this thing actually gets to be built together, like put together? Is it, you know, there's water involved in it, there's also energy involved in it, and I think when you look into this particular, example and you apply it then to the tech industry, we're then talking about all these different small externalities related to you building your product. Even if your product has nothing to do with sustainability or with climate change, it is actually a product that would have some sort of an impact on stakeholders that you might not even think of, but actually are negatively impacted by you. And this example is just a very like blunt one that shows you that it's not all as clear as simply thinking this is an unsustainable type of material, then actually then this is the worst option that we have. It's actually about how we use these resources and how we apply ourselves to improve the use of them. Another element of the responsibility is related to education. I think I took this kind of screenshot from Quora just to, you know, Quora. Someone claimed and made an estimation of how many people work in the tech industry, but supposedly hundreds of millions. I would assume that this is actually fairly close to reality. And with this, what this means is that in terms of responsibility, you, regardless of where you're working and in what stage of the company or of your own career journey you are, you have a lot of capability and possibilities to impact people's lives and to change their mindset. Sustainability doesn't expect you to be an expert on the topic, but as long as the problem is put on the table, there's definitely going to be a crowdsourced solution to how you can approach addressing it as an organization. And I think on the educational side, there's quite often the stigma of, I don't get it fully, so I'm not going to talk about it. And this is probably applicable to many topics in life. We've adopted in Plan 8 the mantra that you need to have the mindset of sustainability being a journey rather than something that is going to take you to the moon. It's more like climbing a hill rather than being like overly ambitious. All of these like 2050 pledges and so on, they're all sounding wonderful. But for reality that we don't even know if it's going to be like as great as it is, because it takes the interplay of everyone's commitments to actually be applied on daily basis today for this 2050 commitment to be realistic. So with this in mind, when you're thinking about education, you should be also considering how today you can engage those concerned in your organization. And I can confirm to you that it really doesn't matter where in your organization you are, like either you're the C-level, you're a board member, or you're like an intern. It really doesn't matter where you're standing. We have so many companies that have started using our product because there was a green champion. There was someone that kicked it off. We have by now organized events for 30,000 people across Europe in different places. We're like Meet the Scientists, movie nights, and so on. Before COVID was more fun. But essentially what these events also, kind of quite a few of them, when they were organized together with individuals from companies, they would literally come from any kind of department. We've worked with the data teams, we worked with the innovation teams and so on, and that kind of to demonstrate that you really shouldn't worry about like, I'm not a decision maker, or like my company is too small for us to kick off something. So finishing notes on where does this leave you, I really hope that this kind of gave you a glimpse of how you can think about the sustainability topic. It's quite often perceived really overwhelming to think about climate change, sustainability, and that's because this is how we've been trained to think about the issue. Climate change is not one issue. It's actually a collection of many issues, and that's the beauty of it. That's our to-do list, but this to-do list can be prioritized, and also for each one of us can be defined in a different way according to the different skills that we have. For a company that is building a product that has a direct connection to some sort of negative externalities to our planet, take this as your responsibility. For someone that is building a physical product, eliminate the waste along the way. And for someone that just wants to do something good and doesn't want to change their business model according to sustainability, like start calculating your emissions, do something that really just kicks off the initiative internally, and talk about it. It don't need to put money behind it, but like get the whole conversation going. On a more practical level, kind of the story is manifold. Like you can decide where you're standing within this whole realm. When Plan A started in 2016, we had no money. There was not a lot of interest in climate change and sustainability. So we used the power of ambassadors and the power of people that would just volunteer to kick off the first data collection elements of it, because something that I didn't explain, and I can dive into it later, is that the first product that we built was an algorithm that predicts where and how climate change will hit the hardest. That will look into data related to oceans, forests, wildlife, sustainable living, sustainable energy, waste management. And majority of the data that we had to collect for that was actually crowdsourced. The data was built, the data model itself was built with the help of a lot of wonderful, intelligent people from different institutes around the world who just wanted to help, and they were doing some totally different jobs. So you can volunteer, you can decide to engage yourself. There's many communities that do that. Like for example, there's Work in Climate, it's a Slack community. We have it for the Green Tech Alliance, like all these 1,300 startups. They're always looking for support in many ways. But if you kind of tiptoeing on the idea of moving even in the industry, like this is a good way to kick it off. And if you want to make a move in the industry, give me a call. We just opened our London office, and we're going to be actually having the most significant hiring here. And data, product are the domains that we're going to be filling in terms of positions the most. And what else is possible is, of course, all the other clean tech companies and green tech companies that are out there. Definitely, as someone that has been for the last few years in Berlin, which is where I'm normally sitting, from next year is going to be also London. There's just so much innovation at the moment that you can like get yourself involved with. And actually what's really exciting about this is that there's now money, and it's not like it felt a few years ago that it was like you do this altruistic exercise and you're like, okay, I'm gonna do something good because I care about the problem. Now you can also be paid in a totally like competitive level as in any other tech company. The second topic is about actually kicking off your own initiative, building your own company. How many of you have your own companies here? 2, nice, hi. Um, well, there you go. Plenty of opportunity for many of you to kick off your own companies. If you kind of decide to do that, please make sure that you follow science. One of the things that we also see with the increase in amount of funding going into the space is that, of course, there's a lot more greenwashing. For those of you that don't know what's greenwashing, is basically using sustainability more as a marketing stunt rather than as an exercise of impact. And the final, not final, sorry, the next thing is related to a kind of taking money when you need them. That's maybe a bit of a mind-boggling one. So one of the things that we have been seeing a lot is that our society and our economy works with a lot of signaling. So you have all these ideas of like something now being trendy and exciting, and basically like this leading to a lot of movement, the economy behind it. And that's great. This is really good because normally like these signals are related not only to speculation, quite often related to speculation, but when they're not related to speculation, it's actually about an actual problem being addressed. But if you take the example of the 10-minute delivery industry, which now I think in 12 months there was like a few billion that have been given to these companies, you're thinking like, okay, if this was given to address climate change, we would have been doing wonders. I actually spoke at COP last week, oh no, 2 weeks ago, as part of the official program on finance, on day finance, about, oh, can I get help? And it was like, I was speaking to a guy from Micronesia. Do you guys know Micronesia? It's one of those island states that is very tiny. Thank you for coming. So Micronesia, that's not funny at all. Like Micronesia, basically now, climate change has gotten now to that level that whenever there's flooding, it literally goes from one side to the other side of the island. It's like, imagine this reality, and then imagine the 2 billion that went for the 10-minute delivery industry. It is quite cynical to look into that particular side of the story because it's, we have a lot of money to be working with, but then if you take money, take them when you need them, and because they could be applied to someone else, something else. Or if you take money, and a lot of them, just make sure that they go also in something that is doing good for the planet in one way or another. Another thing that can allow you to get yourself involved is giving back. I spoke about involving yourself in volunteering and all these kinds of things, but it's just more like the mentality of, where you're not alone, we all live together, we're on this planet, and climate change is going to hit us all. It's not about, and it's unfortunately going to impact a lot of people, a lot more than many of us here, or all of us here, because we live a very comfortable life in the Western world, but just find a way to engage yourself with the topic and just don't think of it as a burdensome exercise. Like, you don't need to get it all. You don't need to understand it all. I have like no background in climate change and sustainability. I just became really curious and was actually able to find a lot of information on the topic. And it's a resource that might be useful is our academy. So on our website, we have like an open source academy where you can educate yourself about climate change in a very like humane manner, without maybe the science being disrespected, but also with the understanding that probably there's some technical terms that need to be explained. If you're managing people, listen to your team. We've been so many times in a situation with our clients where, like, actually N26 is an example, where we have been literally looking into a green champion, like someone that was pushing the sustainability initiative internally for 2 years. And they wouldn't get a budget because no one was listening to them. Finally, they got budget. Because we were kind of supporting them along the way to implement initiatives without us getting paid or whatever. Like, we do care about things changing actually. And like these people actually, some of them even left the company along the way because they were dissatisfied with the fact that no one was listening to their concern about the planet. It doesn't matter if you care about the planet, if your team cares about it, and you want like low retention, so high retention, low churn in terms of numbers of people. Ask them what are their values, what are the concerns that they have, because actually you're going to see that probably a lot of your money related to recruitment would, first of all, either decrease if you start focusing on listening to them, and then as a second stage, be able to actually keep a lot of people and keep them loyal if you give them the space for them to lead this way. we often hear in our domain, because sustainability at this point, because we work with all these corporates, but sadly the story of sustainability at this point is that you have all these different definitions of sustainability. For a bank, it's about regulatory pressure. For a tech company, it's about exposure, visibility, like how do you connect yourself to your clients. And then for small bakery in the middle of London, it's about probably like the personal values of the founder, but also about the fact that, maybe they know that they're being compared to the other 20 bakeries that are just like 2 minutes away from one another, and they want to stand out with something. This means that we as a company, but anyone that is involving themselves into the topic, is actually dealing with a lot of discrepancy in the understanding of the problem, the depth of the knowledge, and also with actually kind of the capacity to do a sales process that is very straightforward, because you're always like tiptoeing, like, "Oh, so what do you think? Like, do you know what scope 1, 2, and 3? No, okay, no, like 5 steps back, like let's start again," and so on. The story with like when you have a budget for sustainability, it's too late. It's the idea that, don't try to get it all today, regardless again in what position you're standing in the whole story, but like make sure that you're not the last one in line whenever it comes to like raising your concern as an individual within a company, like kicking off something, or like being on the C-level, or like a management position, to wait for a budget to be kicked off. You don't need a budget. You can just sit people on a table and get them to cry about how concerned they are about the problem. And that already is going to be a big step forward, because the level of awareness is going to be different. And then the final one is related to kind of the blunt and well-known idea of people, planet, profit, being actually the reason for your success. I have a newsletter on LinkedIn called The Climate of Business. And what I do there is basically I explain the correlation between business and climate. And as part of the preparation for all of the different editions, the last one, for example, was about like Black Friday and carbon taxing, what is going to happen if these two universes collide. And like one thing that becomes quite evident when you do all the research and all the analysis is that there is no way for a business to exist on a failing planet if they're not part of the whole solution, kind of, or on the driving seat of the solution finding. So if you want to be either building or working towards building or setting up or like, managing a company that is successful in 5 to 10 years time, take sustainability seriously. Take sustainability even if you don't understand it, like just do all that you can to kind of embed it into your value proposition, because you're going to be too late to the game otherwise. And even if you're like, let's say you're working in a large corporate and there's like your job is to be analyzing a lot of data or to be building some models, there's still an opportunity to get basically the company to do something, or for you to kick off your own initiative. And it has been now confirmed by so many different statistics that it's just going to cost a lot of money for us to not do anything on climate action. So it's maybe a chance for you to be on the winning side of the story, because there's also a lot of money hidden in the whole industry. With this in mind, I finish, and I look forward to your questions. Of course, yeah. So we work with a fashion company called Gani, and they're like one of the biggest Scandinavian fashion successes. And what they have been doing historically was kind of look into some social impact activities and so on. With us, 2 years ago, they decided to like map out their whole CO2 emission creation and understand how their suppliers are contributing to their emissions. Can I just get a show of hands? Who knows what scope 1, 2, and 3? Okay, let me explain it then. Scope 1 is your facilities and vehicles. Scope 2 is your purchase electricity, heating, cooling. Scope 3 is your suppliers. It's your commute, travel, investments. For a company that is within the tech scene, you're looking into like your data centers, creating a lot of the emissions, the travel of all the team members, the offices, the electricity used for that. For a bank, you're looking at close to 90% of emissions sitting in scope 3 related to investments. So this is financed emissions. For a fashion company, it's predominantly scope 3 category 1, which is suppliers. So when going to the success story, what they decided to do was map out their emissions, and what they found out that there's actually a lot of their suppliers that are incredibly energy inefficient. So what they ended up doing is change, first of all, some of the suppliers because they were not willing to adapt their ways, and also embed in their own production some of the suppliers. So they kind of bought out some of these. And that came out as the analysis that we were able to do with our software. And our software, like now that I've explained what scope 1, 2, and 3, kind of has different modules, and companies can pick and choose what they emphasize on. But the data analysis is the core of everything that we do. A quarter of my team is climate data scientists, and I pride myself on that a lot because we're the only company in the carbon accounting space that has literally like people from Potsdam Institute for Climate Research, ETH Zurich, Yale, and so on. We have on our scientific board like people that basically have coined some of the decarbonization terms that we use. And with this core of the product, we're essentially able to go quite deep and follow stringently, like very closely, all the methodologies that are out there. So that's one success story where like analysis helped to get them to understand which suppliers can be changed. We work with a private equity called Apex. They're one of the biggest private equities in the world. We mapped out their whole portfolio and basically prioritize which companies they need to now spend time on. So for those of you that don't know, if a private equity makes an investment, that means that they own more than 50% of a company. So they actually have the capacity to kindly ask someone and the work to be done. So they mapped out now and they have the priority list of which companies they're going to be knocking the door, on which door they're going to be knocking. So that hopefully gives a bit of an idea. Mhm. We got offered like a few years back 1 million euros from, and at that point we had no millions in investment. So, you know, it had a bit of a different definition for our existence. 1 million euros from a coal company. And they were like, they didn't even want to calculate their emissions. They're just like, put it in some projects. And we're like, what? What do you mean, like, put it in some project? So greenwashing does exist, and I think for all of us, like, honestly, like, even if you don't take any of the suggestions that I gave on what to do next, one thing is keep in mind that your money actually defining the future of this planet, because in the supermarkets that you go, the plastic you decide to buy or support financially, the clothes that you buy, or the jeans that 120 liters of water per pair, like basically define how our economy changes. So greenwashing is going to be even more of a prominent phenomena in the coming years, purely for the fact that sustainability is now becoming key concern of people that have, you know, money, and it sadly is going to become also the concern of the lower earners, as obviously carbon taxing pressures up prices of any of the commodities, any of the things that we actually use. So the greenwashing concern and how maybe you can just practically, like how you can identify it in your day-to-day, but then what we're doing as well on the practical side, like first of all, whenever someone puts a green package or like has some sort of a certification, please read on the label. There's actually legal requirements for you to explain yourself or where the money are going, what does it do. Many products don't, because there's no limitation at the moment in the UK and in the EU on using certain colors or using certain labels. Like, and the most prominent example, I sometimes put it in my speeches, is a paper bottle, which is like for a shampoo. And then it's like you cut the bottle and there's plastic inside. So like it's that's not the point of it. So that's kind of one thing to look at. The second thing is related to if you're looking for, like, let's say you're looking for a job in a company. When you say that you are carbon neutral, actually at the moment, sadly, there's still no regulation that requires companies to fully assess their scope 3, and they can use averages. So a bank that is investing heavily in fossil fuels, something that I didn't explain about scope 3 is that scope 3 category 15, investments. How do you calculate the emissions on investments? It's the scope 1 and 2 of these investments. So if you've invested in a fossil fuel company, or you've invested in cement or whatever, like a very polluting company, these emissions are huge. You can only imagine. But because of the legal requirements at the moment, actually banks are, it's totally fine if you just use an average when you send the report, and you can just imagine, like, what is a bank gonna prefer to do if they need to basically then go on buy buy certificates and then be able to kind of claim carbon neutrality. Who knows what's carbon neutrality? So when you go through this whole, like, scope 1, 2, and 3 assessment, you come out with a number, right? Like, this is like let's say 100. In order for you to become carbon neutral, you need to buy the equivalent of this 100 in carbon credits. Carbon credits could be created by projects that plant trees. That's the worst option, because, like, trees normally are at 30% able to survive. So, and also, like, it takes a lot of time until they actually deliver the value. Like, for an average tree, basically takes 5 years until it kind of is able to encompass, like, to fulfill its job, so to say, except being beautiful. And the other types of projects are related to sustainable energy, so substituting energy in one, like, in a geography that is heavily dependent on coal with maybe solar and so on. So this is carbon neutrality. So whenever a company claims carbon neutrality, just make sure that you check if they have calculated using averages their CO2, sorry, yeah, exactly, the scope 3 emissions. And then the final element is related to, like, how prominent is it on their, as part of their value proposition. And that's where we're going to be getting in the next probably, like, 5 to 10 years, where sustainability is going to be embedded into the business model of a company, and any department is going to have, like, a sustainability person in it. An example of company that is doing this already is Dell, the computer company. They have, like, a sustainability person in every department, which is pretty impressive. And on the planning side, what we do is basically we've only allowed 3 of our clients to claim carbon neutrality. So they cannot claim it on our behalf, or at least that we've done the job, because we just don't like averages. Like, it's just not something that if you have a scientific team, like, you can't. We've had, like, so many emotional disputes of seeing some greenwashing, and then the team, like, all goes mental. So it's yeah, that's at least on our side of the story. Unfortunately, there's a lot of greenwashing with carbon neutrality claims. Yes, please. A good question. Our methodology is open. It's on our website. So, and actually, we follow the GHG protocol, which is kind of the widely accepted framework for carbon accounting. GHG, Greenhouse Gas Protocol. So it gets a bit more complicated if you really want to get granular on a certain industry level. So there's different methods to calculate emissions. So, for example, for fashion, you have the Higgs method. Higgs method looks also into soil health. It looks at water consumption, and also, of course, at, like, CO2 intensity. You have the PCAF methodology that is for financial institutions. We use that whenever we calculate emissions on private equity, hedge funds, and so on. And then there's other types of kind of diving deep into it, but the GHG protocol is kind of the Bible of the kind of the encyclopedia kickoff. And there's a few other encyclopedias as well. You wanted to ask a question before?
The approach of, there are a few countries which have actually started doing serious climate policies. Eamon Ryan announced one for Ireland 2 weeks ago. Could the approach that you've been doing with companies on monitoring and recording actually be scaled up or integrated to work at the level of a country?
Absolutely. And actually, we're about to announce in January, like with one of the biggest payment companies in the world, projects for cities. So, like a part of our platform that is only for calculating emissions of cities. And there you're looking into like the emissions of a church and a school and like all these different real estate elements of it, but also, of course, like the electricity that is within the kind of on the streets and so on. It's totally applicable. It's a different type of approach that you do because you need to add all these elements to one another. But we're starting to do some little steps in it. There's a few other projects that are doing Climate View, for example. It's a Scandinavian company that's solely focusing on city emissions. Yeah, for countries, like it kind of is just scaling this up because obviously there's a lot of repeated elements within a country. I've been told that I need to stop. I want to just say as a final thing, we are hiring. If anyone is looking for a job, we're opening our office in London in the 1st of January, but we can already onboard people fairly quickly. We are 60 people, Berlin, Munich, Paris, and London now. And we just raised 10 million from some of our investors are SoftBank and a few other less prominent ones.